Ready?
Are we going?
Yeah.
Woo!
So yeah, I want to make sure the door is unlocked before you to come over. So anyway, I'm glad you made it.
It rains about every 2 years in California.
Yeah, I know, right? So you get to a nice thunderstorm while you're here. So as you guys can see, the studio is a really simple room. It's certainly not state-of-the-art or anything. This section of the old carriage house used to be the stable side. So he took out the stalls in the hayloft that were originally in here. He put up this cheap siding, which, as you can see, never even finished off the walls or made it look nice.
You know, the painter doesn't even paint his own. Like the mechanic that never
He didn't care.
fixed his own car.
This is
you know.
very much a workspace for him.
Yeah.
One of the bigger changes he made, though, was actually adding in that large window. And that's where the old stable door used to be. So like many painters, Benton preferred the softer northern light, so that faces north. Northern light is ideal to paint with because it's indirect and it won't change and cast shadows as much as the sun
See,
moves.
this is my light theory of why I hate the type of light that comes through my window. See, it's justified.
So you guys can talk about this,
You're
right?
vindicated.
I have a
She's
whole
my little
thing
artist.
about light.
Yeah.
Okay?
Nice,
I have a
okay.
whole thing.
See, if you're an artist, you think about things like this. So that's what Benton did. And he actually painted over every single southern and eastern window on those sides of the building. So it wasn't about privacy, it was just about controlling where the light was coming from, the light he wanted to work with. Benton was also a draftsman type of artist. He was not the spontaneous type who might just take a canvas to a field. Instead, he was really methodical. He began by taking a sketching trip. So he'd tell his wife, Rita, I'm gonna go south this year, out west, or back east. Those trips could last anywhere from a week, sometimes up to a few months, just depending on if he was getting good material, if his money's lasting, if he was enjoying himself, things like that. So right over there in the stand, you guys can see one of his original field sketches. The kinds you would do on a trip like that. And I'm sure you'll notice right away, it's totally different from the sketch you saw next door. It's also got a long way to go before it looks like a finished painting of his. So this is very much a jumping off point. It's kind of this cartoonish style of drawing while he's on the road, but he could do these quickly. So he would come back home with sketchbooks just chock full of ideas for future paintings. Once he was here, he'd pick a scene he wanted to work with, and usually take some artistic license. That's where he would rearrange things to kind of suit his needs, work out the organization and movement. That's when he do sketches like the one you saw next door.
Yeah.
When it's planted on paper, the next major step was to make a maquette. I think this is the coolest part of this process. Maquettes are these clay and wax models you see on the shelves over here. The best example of what a typical one looks like is the one on the lower shelf of the railroad workers. Do you guys all see the one I'm talking about? It's under glass.
Yeah.
So he was literally creating a three-dimensional model of his painting before ever putting a brush to canvas, which I find incredible.
That is incredible.
Not all painters can sculpt, and here he's literally sculpting his entire painting beforehand. That would help him get the highlights, the shadows, the depth, the details that are missing from his kind of simple drawings.
So did he ever do any sort of statuing?
He did. You guys will see 3 bronzes in the house.
Oh, okay.
They weren't big, they were kind of tabletop size like those are.
Okay.
But obviously it wasn't a difficult transition for him to make since he was already doing these models for his paintings. And of course, after this, he still has to go back to a flat surface, so he's not done yet. He would then do a grayscale painting, and you guys can see this unfinished one. I actually like that it's incomplete, because in the white spaces he hadn't filled in yet, you can still make out that grid in the background. Do you guys all see that? He would add that in because he would change the scale of his painting a couple of times, and that makes it a lot easier for an artist to either scale down or scale up. And as you can see, he didn't go over this in color either. This was all about figuring out the underlying painting and the values first. So after this is done, he would then downsize and do a small color study painting. That would help him figure out the color palette and decide if he wanted to make any last minute changes. And you guys will see a couple nice examples of those in the house. And then finally, he'd go to the full-size canvas or panel, redraw his grid, redraw everything up to scale, and then paint it. At that point, it's almost like painting by numbers. He did so much prep work. He knows what's going in every single segment of that final canvas. So just a mind-blowing amount of work. As I'm sure you guys know or can guess, this is not a typical way to paint, not a usual process. But it made sense for Benton because he loved to paint on a large scale. I'm not sure which of his pieces you guys have seen in person, but he loved to do murals in particular. Those could be enormous. And even his average easel paintings. You guys can see some of those unused frames. Those are pretty typical sizes for an average painting of his. So having it panned out meant he'd make a lot fewer mistakes or changes in that final version. Now, I'm always curious, have you guys ever heard or read anything about Benton's personality or beliefs in art, anything along those lines at all? No? Okay, I know you're a fan, so I wanted to ask you in particular if you'd ever come across anything like that. But Benton, I always ask, because he had a reputation. He could be a little snarky, a little cantankerous. He didn't shy away from getting in debates with people in the art world. Sometimes they got very heated. And it didn't matter if it was a fellow artist, critic, a museum curator, you name it. He really believed American art should have a social context. It should mean something to whoever's looking at it. I think that's why he really rose to fame during the 1930s Great Depression era. He was painting everyday people in everyday places at a time the country was struggling to get by. It was nice to see everyday people in art. And throughout his career, a huge theme for him was common art for the common man, and I love that idea. So aside from showing relatable images actually in his art, he did things like murals, like we were just talking about, because he thinks murals are the highest form of art since they're public art. You don't have to be wealthy to own them, or go to a museum to see them. You can go to the Truman Library, walk right in and see that mural that you loved since you were a kid. The Oculus and Hercules mural I pointed out next door, that was originally in a downtown department store. You could go shopping in downtown and there it was. So it was in your daily life. And another way he made art more accessible to people who were interested was he also did these black and white lithograph prints. Keep an eye out, because you guys will see several more in the main house. But initially he really got going on those in the 30s, did them for a big portion of his career, and you could order them in magazines, catalogs, buy them in stores for like $5 a piece. So an average person could have art from a big name artist in their home without having to pay the price of a huge painting of his. So he wanted art to be accessible and he wanted it to be relatable, and I definitely think he achieved those goals. But as I alluded to, he knew how to make people mad and he kind of seemed to enjoy doing it too. He definitely was an artist who pushed people's buttons. Have you guys been over to the Nelson Atkins?
But aren't most artists kind of like that a little bit?
Some of them,
you know?
more so than others. But just definitely a little on the extreme side of things. So to give you an example, have you guys seen his art at the Nelson Atkins Museum since
No, we haven't gone there yet.
Okay, I'm not sure if you'll have time or not, but they do have a nice collection if you're curious.
Well, that's hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, so hopefully you'll get to see it. One of the paintings, if you get over there, I want you to keep an eye out for, is called Persephone, based on the Greek myth, kind of like the one you guys saw next door. In this case, though, it's like a 7-foot-tall nude painting. And Persephone was finished in 1939. It was considered very risque for the time, even though nudes had been done for centuries. She's in sort of a pinup girl position. They literally referred to it as a nude in the newspapers at the time. So a gallery in St. Louis was doing an exhibit of Benton's art. At the time, they said, we don't want this painting. We don't want any uproar from the public. You can imagine that didn't sit well with Benton, and frankly, it just made people want to see it even more. So they weren't making anyone happy. He was in New York at the time doing an interview, and he actually goes so far as to say that museums are graveyards where paintings go to die, and he'd rather have his art hung in places like saloons and bar rooms because real people would see them there. So you can imagine, like, this is not an artist. He does not win over a lot of friends in the art world. He knows how to kind of push the boundaries. And of course, to prove his point, because he was a man of action, he sent Persephone to a saloon in New York for 6 months. Never sold that painting during his lifetime, so somewhat ironically, it is now in a museum. But anyway, so you'll have to keep an eye out for it if you guys get a chance to go over there. 2 more things. We'll head over to the main house. I did want to point out this print right over here, just because it's a print of the very last mural that never worked on. And it's called Sources of Country Music. It was commissioned by the Country Music Hall of Fame in Nashville, and Tom started this in 1974, so he's 85 years old at this point. He's a classic American painter. As you guys also know, he loves music. He's the ideal artist for this piece. And you've got all these roots of Americana, folk, and country, like the cowboy playing guitar, choir and gospel singers, a church on a hill, a train, a riverboat, fiddle players, even a dulcimer is thrown in there. So as many of these early roots and instruments and influences as he could fit in there. He was ahead of schedule, told his wife Rita, I'm going to do some final touches after dinner. If I'm happy with it, I'll sign it tonight. That's when he died of a heart attack. If you look at it closely, there are just a few details he hadn't quite gotten to yet. Like, notice in the background, there's no wire between the telephone poles.
Oh, yeah.
Do any of you guys know how many tuning knobs are typically on a guitar?
6.
If you look at the one the cowboy's holding, there's only 3.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't just the angle of the guitar, there also weren't 6 strings when he passed away. That's the only thing someone touched up after his death. The other, kind of the biggest thing, is he hadn't signed it yet either, since that would have been pretty much the very last thing he'd do. But they considered it essentially done. It's hanging in Nashville where it's supposed to go, and frankly, what a way to go out. I mean, he died doing the thing he loved most. Got to paint until the very day he passed away. So, that was at nearly 86 years old. That was January of 1975, just a few months away from his 86th birthday. Finally, the last thing I want to mention, just so you guys can kind of appreciate it as we go through the studio and the rest of the house, everything you see in here in the home is original. They're not props. Those really are his paintbrushes. He kept them in old coffee cans. Tom really did have his sink propped up with a stool and a brick, because for him that was fixing it as long as it wasn't going to fall off the wall. So I love it because things are not perfect, but they're authentic, and it gives you a much better feel for how he worked out here, and of course how the family lived in the home too. So keep an eye out for that, because even though the Bentons lived in this great home, beautiful neighborhood, they lived really frugally. I think a lot of that was the fact that Tom and Rita had gone through many starving artist years together, as well as the Great Depression. So like a lot of people of their generation, they got in the habit of not spending very extravagantly on things, even after they had enough money to do so later on. Any questions about anything in here specifically that you guys see or that we talked about, or?
So, am I correct? This was his main studio?
Yes, this
okay.
was and used it for nearly 40 years of his career.
Okay.
So yeah, this is absolutely it. He did have others, when he was living elsewhere, and when he was teaching, he would have a studio. On
So for instance, this art piece right here, he was working on it.
He worked on it in this studio.
In the studio.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, as often as possible, even the large projects like those murals, he would do himself here on site whenever he could. Occasionally they were too large, like the Oculus and Hercules one. He did most of the painting down on site at the store.
Did he write music? Because
He did. So I told you guys he loved music. He actually loved to collect folk songs. Would kind of on his travels around the country, write down any new ones that he heard. He even shared them with Charlie Seeger, who's Pete Seeger's dad. So kind of interesting.
Oh, interesting.
Connection there.
Yeah, for sure.
So he definitely was a huge fan, and when we go into the house, you guys will see an album on top
Liking
of
this
the
guy
piano.
even more and more now.
I know. So yeah, he even cut a record with Decca in 1941, and it was mostly folk songs on there. So yeah, definitely. He even came up with his own notation system for writing harmonica music, because you didn't have to, be able to traditionally
Innovator
read
too.
music. Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So he was quite a character, very interesting guy. Well, we can head over to the main house, and I will show you guys around there. I think it's not pouring quite as hard right now,